Charlotte, and you are watching The Ugly Atheist. Last week, I was out sick, so I posted an older video. Hopefully you got a chance to watch that and enjoyed it. I had some laryngitis and was getting over a cold. I still have a bit of a crackly voice, so this episode's just going to be sort of, I'm going to try to keep it light and more playful, I guess. We're going to just respond to a few memes that I came across that are Christian memes, and I think they'll make for some interesting conversation. And I picked these memes sort of at random. I just did a meme search, and so I don't know how old these memes are. If I had to guess, I'd say they're probably pretty old, or not. I don't know. So we'll start on with this first one. This is a dog with his kitchen on fire, and the caption is, "Me when I tried life without Jesus for a while." I think this one's funny. I think maybe a lot of Christians can relate, having been a Christian and having lost the faith and realized the reality of religion. I was expecting something like this to happen to my life, but some things got more difficult and some things got easier. I know when I first came to the realization that religion was just made up by people, I felt two things primarily. I felt a bunch of things, but two things that really stuck out that I still remember to this day. The first one is sort of a sadness for having lived a lie for so many years. It was almost a decade that I was just immersed in the call of God to make disciples of every nation, and using all my skills and talents to that end, and to realize that all of that was just made up. And I did make a positive difference in some people's lives, but was that worth living a lie to accomplish? Could I not make a difference in people's lives without the mythology? Oh yeah, so it's kind of a bittersweet moment where I'm glad that I finally realized the truth of the matter, but it was sad because I knew that things were not going to be the same from then on out, and I could not continue doing ministry work understanding that it's all fake. And so, but this leads me to the other thing that was kind of more surprising for me to realize. I had been living under a tremendous weight when I was a Christian, because, and I think it's the book of James, it says that God disciplines those he loves. And so I kept in the back of my mind, I must have been constantly on edge and worried about what kind of discipline is going to be coming my way, because God clearly loves me, so he's going to do something drastic to grow my faith. And I welcomed the idea of my faith growing, but I didn't realize what kind of strain and stress that puts on a person when they know, okay, something bad's coming. I know God's going to help me through whatever it is, but he's got something horrible planned for me, but at the same time, something wonderful. And it wasn't until I came to that realization that religion is fake, it's just man-made, and that burden lifted off my shoulders. I felt this weight lifted off of me, and that was the most surprising. I was not expecting. I didn't even know I was under that much pressure, just waiting for some calamity, because that's how God shows you he loves you, is by delivering hardship into your life so that you can grow and get closer to him and rely on him more. I didn't encounter any of what this meme seems to be implying, where your life's on fire and you're out of control. And or anything remotely close to this. It was just like life just sort of became normal, without the supernatural element. Life can seem kind of boring in a way, but boring is preferable to calamity, and boring is perfectly fine. It's not a bad way to live, I mean, you want some excitement from time to time, but if the worst that ever happens to you is that you experienced a normal, regular life, I mean, that's more than a lot of people can say. So this one's funny. There's a guy, for those of you who are just listening instead of watching, which is probably none of you. There's a guy holding binoculars, and the binoculars have the caps on them. And the caption says, "When atheists claim they have yet to find proof for God's existence." This one's funny because the reason that atheists exist nowadays has to do with evidence. Like for me, when I came to the realization that religions are the kinds of things that humans make up, and there's thousands of examples throughout history of just how humans make up religions, and they serve a very critical function in a society and a culture, but they're just fables. These things didn't really happen. All these things are just archetypes, as Jordan Peterson might say. So especially during the time of enlightenment, we amassed enough evidence to where many people just more or less came to that realization, like, okay, all of this stuff is just baloney, isn't it? Science has sort of answered a lot of the questions that we used to wonder about, and phenomenon that we used to attribute to a deity throughout the eons. Like, where did thunder and lightning come from? That's clearly the only answer is supernatural, isn't it? And science eventually figured out, through just careful, systematic experimentation and examination, we figured out how a ton of different natural phenomena work. And at no point did we reach the conclusion that, it looks like this one here actually is God. I think that's what caused a lot of people to lose their faith, is that overwhelming evidence that religions are not real, and that this character named God is, especially as described in the Bible, is so full of contradictions that there's no way. It's clearly stories written by humans who didn't realize like multiple authors can't cross-reference each other constantly. I mean, they get a lot of things consistent, more things are consistent than not, but the inconsistencies are glaring, like they're unignorable, and they're irreconcilable, which is a hallmark of human invention, So, yeah, this meme isn't really mean anything. It doesn't make any sense. So let's move on to this next meme. We have a guy with question marks, and he's saying, "You say God's not real because you can't see him." Well, that's not why I say he's not real. I don't think you saw evolution either. This one's funny because this is something that's taught to churches and congregations under the context of apologetics. They think that unless you see it with your own eyes, you can't say that it happened. You have to have faith that it happened. But what they don't understand is that we actually have seen evolution with our own eyes. We've seen it in the lab. We've seen it in the wild. We've seen new species emerge. And the fact that you can, using artificial selection, create such a vast array of dog breeds, these are, that's proof that the principle of evolution is a reality. You couldn't make all those different breeds of dogs if it weren't for genetic mutations. And in the case of dog breeds, like humans carefully selected which breeds, what traits to carry on to the next generation. Whereas in real life, without human intervention, it's the environment that makes those decisions. Like if the environment's too cold, the short-haired variations will probably suffer and die off younger before they're able to reproduce. And the longer-haired variations will stay more thermally insulated and will live long enough to reproduce. And of course, their young, their babies or offspring, are going to carry on or harbor the long-haired traits. And so then you have just little minimal phenotypical traits from generation to generation that better suits one member of a litter for survival than another. And that's how natural selection works. And I can hear some Christians saying, yeah, but it's still a dog. It didn't become a tree. And that's true, because evolution by natural selection does not make any kind of claims that an animal will become something that its parents were not. If you think that that's what evolution is saying, or what it teaches, you are incorrect. Evolution does not claim that a tree will become a fish and that will become a person. But there is modifications from in a lineage. So like vertebrates, like the animal that was a fish, like some population of fish began to spend more time in shallower waters looking for food, and they became, through that process I described with the dogs, they became more suited for the shallower waters, and perhaps were able to spend longer and longer times out of water. And there are still, of course, plenty of other fish that stayed in the deep, but we have an event where there's a branching, where due to natural selective environmental changes, two different lines of fish that are starting to emerge in this little scenario I'm discussing. And it's not unfathomable to see how the fish that spend time on the shallows would eventually become more and more land dwelling and become vertebrates. They remain vertebrates because that's what their parents were, but now they are land dwelling vertebrates, and that eventually again continued adaptations that lead to further changes in their phenotype and what genes are expressed. And at some point, the land-dwelling fish will not be able to reproduce with their ocean-dwelling counterparts, because the genetics are just so different at some point that they won't be able to interbreed. And you could call that a new species, and that's a new species of animal. We've seen evolution. We've watched speciation happen, from single-celled organisms to insects to frogs, amphibians. So we've seen it happen, and we understand how it happens, and the fossil record shows how that happened. I know a lot of believers like to say we don't have any transitional fossils, but what they mean by that is they're looking for something between a tree and a person. And yeah, there's no transitional fossils between a tree and a person. We do have intermediary stages between early humans and modern humans. We have lots of intermediary stages between the miniature prehistoric horses and the horses of today. Let's go on to the next meme. We have this one. Jesus is hanging out with some kids, looks like, and he says, "When did I realize I was God? Well, I was praying and I suddenly realized I was talking to myself." Yeah, this one's not a Christian meme. It's more of a atheist meme. And I think it's funny because when you're praying, you're literally talking to yourself, but that doesn't mean prayer is not important. I think prayer serves as a major calming device. Like if you're full of anxiety and you just kind of talk out your problem and you pretend someone's listening or you believe someone's listening, that is a huge psychological advantage over your stress level. And you have, it's extremely useful. It helps reduce your cortisol levels. It helps you to have maintain hope in a dire situation. So it's a very, like, I don't downplay prayer at all. I think prayer is super important. I encourage everybody to pray because it's tremendously helpful. Even if it's just talking to yourself. Let's move on to the next meme. We have, looks like a yearbook picture. I think this one's old. I mean, all these are probably old, but I do remember having seen this one a few years ago. A student named Jalen Moore. I asked God for a bike, but I know God doesn't work that way, so I stole a bike and asked God for forgiveness. Yeah, this has been a problem with Christianity and the idea of morality. I guess the method by which you are saved in the Christian doctrine literally has nothing to do with morality. It has everything to do with faith. Like, faith above morality is what gets you into heaven. Morality doesn't, you can't work your way into heaven. You can't do a bunch of nice things and end up going to heaven. You can't, follow or be the nicest, kindest, most altruistic person in the world and get to heaven. The only thing that gets you into heaven, according to Christianity, is believing on bad evidence that Jesus is died for your sins. So, and I think this meme kind of outlines that in a funny way, because stealing a bike is a sin, but that's not necessarily going to keep you out of heaven. It's not going to let you, and not stealing is not going to let you get into heaven. Not being forgiven for it is what's going to send you to hell. So this, as backwards as this sounds, it's completely in line with the Christian doctrine, where it's easier to steal something and just ask for forgiveness later, and God will, according to Christian doctrine, He'll forgive you, and that settles the problem. So this guy, Jalen Moore, found a loophole, and it's a big, giant loophole that any Christian can take advantage of. But I say that in jest. Don't go out there stealing bikes or whatever. Let's move on to the next meme. This one is funny. I won't spend much time on this one. So it's a picture, a painting of Jesus, and he says, this is not actually Jesus talking. They should have put a picture of Noah's Ark, but it says, there comes a time as a Christian when you must ponder the question, was Bigfoot on Noah's Ark? Yeah, if you believe the story of Noah's Ark, every species that's currently alive was on the ark. And they didn't specify what race Noah and his family were. I imagine they were Semitic or Middle Eastern looking people, but if you believe the story of Noah's Ark, then that family was able in 6,000 years to populate the world and be naturally selected for different skin shades depending on what region they moved to. And you would have to concede that Bigfoot, if he exists, had to have been on Noah's Ark. Now, of all the cryptids that people claim exists, from the Loch Ness Monster to the Chupacabra to werewolves, whatever. I think the one that is probably the most plausible is Bigfoot. Does that mean I think Bigfoot is real? Not at all. But out of all of the cryptozoology, critters, Bigfoot's the one that could possibly exist, because there was a giant ape called Gigantopithecus, but he was more like an orangutan. He didn't walk on his 2 feet. He was not bipedal, and he lived in the area of Asia and China, where current day China resides. Okay. Finally, the last meme here. We've got a quote from Russell Brand, a post probably on X. I think this was on X. Oh no, this was on Instagram, I think. I don't know. I love Russell Brand. I think he's amazing. I wish I could speak like him as eloquently. He has no problem expressing his thoughts and converting his thoughts into words that are not only intelligible but are poetic. It's like listening to a symphony when he talks. But he has lately become immersed in Catholicism, and it's becoming more difficult to watch his content. So I'm trying to just, I watch his stuff sparingly now, but he's still a brilliant man. So I can't fault him for becoming a Catholic. He's an emotionally driven man, which is fair, which is fine. All of us, to one degree or another, are emotionally driven. And we make decisions based on those emotions. And he made the decision that Catholicism is the way to go. So his quote is, "A drug problem is a spiritual problem." Given that spirituality is not a thing, people say they're spiritual, but there's no spirits. There's nothing like that exists in real life. A drug problem is a brain chemistry problem, and that we do have evidence for, and that is something that we can treat and we can study and we can learn from. So there's hope for addicts, and we come out with new treatments all the time to help people kick the habit with minimal damage and minimal suffering. So yeah, while it's not a spiritual problem, I know a lot of people struggle with drugs, and what's interesting, it's one of the many great things about Christianity is that that philosophy, and I mentioned this in other videos too, helps people break habits like that. I've seen people come off drugs with resounding success because of Christianity. So if you want to think of it as a spiritual problem, and if that helps you kick the habit, by all means, go for that. That's fantastic. I will not fault anyone for that. So I am happy that Russell Brand, I think many years ago, he found his sobriety, but I know it's a daily struggle for people who are addicts, have that addict personality type. If that's even relevant, I don't even know if we categorize it as personality type these days. That's sort of an older language for that phenomenon. I'll leave it there, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate you watching. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. So anyway, I'm Charlotte. You're watching The Ugly Atheist, and hope to see you next week. Bye.